warm welcome to the session that brings together CEOs and heads of organizations that are championing the development of education, particularly the underprivileged, from different settings. Together, they operate in the sphere of philanthropy, enhancing social impact, enhancing opportunities for education, skills, technology awareness and skills for excluded students, youth, and workforce. Why is this important in such a big event where we are mostly talking to government partners and sovereign agencies? I think philanthropic work is increasingly intersecting with social impact initiatives and collaboration with government and public systems and influencing mainstream public delivery. Philanthropic capital is increasingly commingling with private sector and public funds to ensure equitable delivery mechanisms and to bring innovations and new ventures to the table. I think I'm also hearing a lot about blended financing in the recent years. The discourse around blended financing has also really been on an upswing as an instrument that is catching global attention. Like for instance, the Indonesian G20 launched the Global Blended Finance Alliance and introduced the G20 principles to scale up blended finance. The Indian G20 discussions led to the first sustainable finance report. So this is very much top of mind for policymakers, development practitioners, and how do we crowd in different sources of finance to make an impact on SDGs. And for us, we are really concerned around education. So blended finance really aims to use strategic use of different sources of finance, catalyzing commercial, philanthropic, and public funds. So it helps to increase the sort of the balance, the risk return profile, and also enables innovations and new ventures. So we're really delighted to welcome very seasoned professionals to this panel. There are three, if you thought this is a very lean panel, there are three people online today. So let me start with the online participants first. We have the pleasure to welcome Mr. Fahad Hamad Zain Al-Sulaiti, who is the CEO of the Education Above All Foundation. So Education Above All Foundation has been doing some really remarkable work in increasing access and opportunities for education in many settings, including partnering with agencies like ADB, working directly to serve the interests of the disadvantaged in accessing education. We have the CEO of Philanthropic, and Philanthropic is really focusing on youth skills, again in a very marginalized and excluded context. Mr. Hassan Ali Al-Mullah is joining virtually this session, and Philanthropic again has been, we all know that especially in our region and also globally, youth unemployment tends to be several times more than average unemployment. So Philanthropic has been doing some very interesting and very valuable work in increasing access to skills for the disadvantaged youth. Then we have Chris Shahinian, who is head of TUMO International. The TUMO Center for Creative Technologies is an innovative and free of charge digital education programs that's really working with these disadvantaged teens and in very interesting and very inclusive ways of increasing exposure to technology skills that are in due course increasing access to employment and employability. Last but definitely not least, again, a very familiar face for ADB and a long-term compatriot from Temasek Foundation, Stanley Lee, who is Senior Director of International Programs, and he leads the international team at Temasek Foundation. He drives the social impact programs in the region. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us. And definitely going back to the virtual format, I'd like to introduce Porek Power, who is the COO of the Global Partnership for Education, which is extremely well known for all of us working in the education sector, and has done some really remarkable work, in working with governments and international partners to provide access to grants to support nationwide reform programs in education. I mean, they've done some really remarkable work recently to mobilize a tremendous amount of resources to expand their operations. We're also in very close dialogue with them. Let me start with my first question to the CEO of the Education Above All Foundation, Mr. Fahad Al-Sulaiti. I mean, acknowledging that EA is so well recognized for its commitment to promote education as a right to vulnerable groups. Could you share a little bit about what has been your approach in a post-COVID era and how to secure the opportunities that may be slipping a little bit because of the COVID disruptions, and how do you see the process of strengthening the opportunities for education for the vulnerable youth? Could you speak a little bit about your work, and also more specifically in the digitalization era post-COVID? Over to you.
Thank you so much, and really appreciate this opportunity. I would like to thank you for this invitations. So, just to address, exactly what you are saying, what post-COVID, and especially on the access for educations. After COVID, unfortunately, the numbers of out-of-school children around the world have been increased by around 6 to 7%, So we really been shocked with these numbers, and we were saying, why this? And we have done really a big study with our partners, with World Bank and others, and trying to find out exactly what's the issue, what's happened to this, And actually, one of the main issue that we found is that the economic situations. And you mentioned very clearly, that the blended financing and what the issue, because lots of countries need after COVID to go on to pay back, for the installments and making the process, for the loans, which is really affecting the budget of the countries. And therefore, there was a big gap, reducing the commitment in education, especially, during COVID. A lot of countries have reallocated their resources to go to health, and other sectors, which is really very hard to bring it back to this. And the second issue is that when the countries now to be coming and to be back on that, and you can see after COVID, there are lots of countries that collapsing, unfortunately, on the currency issues, on the economic issue. So we've been really tackling this very, very serious, with all our partners. And we were, starting to talk about how could we scale, the access to quality education to bring it not back, but to go over COVID, because we thought that COVID was a good solution where people going for digitals, so we are talking about innovation of digitals and how could this solve it, and how we can utilize these tools that we have during COVID that we can escalate it to the marginalized peoples. So we come with initiatives, with our partners, and one of our partners here is GBE, thinking about a very innovative financing, and how could we come over, on the idea, for example, of debt relief for certain countries. And this is something that we are working together with our partners, trying to find concrete solutions, for certain countries that really they deserve to have debt relief, for certain educational projects. And therefore, the idea is that the one that we are working on now is how to transfer this relief, to education projects in their countries, subject that, there will be a commitment from the countries to reallocate certain budget on this debt relief to go to educations. Based on that, we believe that the partnership is very important, and collaborative of scaling, for education, it's very key. And this is what we have done, Our commitment today is exceeding $3 billion with our partners, and we come together to put a very ambitious target where we have achieved now for 15 million kids around the world in 60 countries. But this is not enough, because still the gap is high, and we need to focus a lot. And one of the innovative way that for scaling that we were working on is how we can go to zero out-of-school children in certain primary age, in certain countries. So we started now with pilot in 4 countries, and one of the countries that we're partnering actually with GBE in Djibouti now, and World Bank. And this is something that, we are very very ambitious about it, and we want to scale this in other countries. As you mentioned, for example, our partnership with the bank, with Asian Development Bank, is, for example, in Pakistan now, where we have targeted 1 million out of school children, trying to address and scale, our projects to achieve the biggest number that in the world, and this is something that we want to keeping up, and how can we have hitting a big target for out of school children in a very innovative way. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You captured some numbers and the sort of overall focus, and the zero out of school children target is excellent, because unless they get into the mainstream, it's really hard to build on higher order competencies, right? It just becomes increasingly difficult. Let me turn to Mr. Hassan Al Mullah. Youth employment is such a pressing challenge for most of our policymakers, if not all. As I mentioned, youth unemployment is a big challenge. Could you talk a little bit about how you've gone about addressing increasing opportunities in skills for employment for young people? What have been the lessons? And COVID led to such a great loss of jobs, but also because of digitalization has given rise to many new opportunities as well. So how do you see the experience of your work, and going ahead, what are the areas you're focusing on? Over to you.
Good morning, first of all, and thank you for having me today. First, I would like to thank you for inviting me into this important discussion. And one of the things that I want to emphasize in the beginning, and this, I've been hearing a lot about how we tackle this issue, and it's actually looking at youth and as education as an investment rather than as aid, as we are working in the development sector. And in fact, it's a very long-term investment, and that's why it is important to talk about the beginning stage as well as the end stage. You are absolutely right in terms of youth unemployment rates. They are much higher than the average unemployment rate in developing countries, and in some cases, they could reach double what the average rate is, especially in certain countries. In Philanthropic, we've been working on addressing this issue by focusing on the end result, which is employment and self-employment in most cases due to the lack of employment opportunities in marginalized and developing countries. Once we establish, the end result, we actually work on identifying the gaps towards those end goals. And then we try to co-create as well as co-fund the most suitable models with international partners to eliminate that gap. And looking at our experience, in the past 15 years, I would say we can combine those gaps into three categories. One being the lack of skills, both technical as well as soft, the lack of reach or access, as you can call it, both in the physical as well as the virtual world. And finally, the lack of financing, which a lot of us are now talking about, and especially for self-employment, which we looked at as an employment opportunity through the creation of SMEs and income-generating activities. Now, focusing on the skills gap, as it is the topic of our discussion today, we do recognize that it's a cost-cutting issue because it's required in all aspects of employment, which we believe that can be supported through both quality education at an early stage, but also through training at a later stage, whether it's on the job or before getting an employment opportunity. And that investment can only yield the biggest value, which is why I emphasize on the need of result focus. So we need to have an end result for them to be able to be incentivized for the youth beneficiaries to basically have an incentive as well as encourage to continue the path of education as well as training. Identifying the employment and self-employment opportunities first, and then training to place those youth into these opportunities actually close the skill gap in the most effective way. The last thing that I want to mention is the creation of a world where most youth have access to skills for quality jobs, and this is basically the scale-up. And we believe that the biggest enabler for scale-up quality education as well as the skills for employment is actually the utilization of digital solutions and technology. In today's digital world, harnessing technology to reach a broader audience can play a transformative role in expanding access and destroying geographical barriers. We utilize digital solutions for equipping young people with the skills they need to thrive in the digital age, ensuring that no one is left behind. This, in turn, contributes to a digitally skilled and adaptable workforce and promotes entrepreneurship at a very large scale, which then supports the scale up of education as well as training for employment specifically. Thank you.
Thank you. With permission from you, I'll still like to go to the third person online, Poreg Power. Poreg, you have been at the forefront of the recent initiative to build up an impressive finance mobilization for the GP's next round. And you're also discussing very substantive partnerships at national level with many countries. How do you see going forward? Like, how do you take stock of GP's like impact on increasing access to education in the previous era, and now looking forward to your next round, and also taking stock of this whole digitalization, pressing challenges that come with digitalization, but also opportunities, as well as the climate agenda. How do you see GPE position in the current times, and where do you see the maximum opportunities for impact?
Great. Well, thank you, Shanti. It's a pleasure to be part of this event. So maybe a little bit of evolution of how GPE has evolved. Pre-2020, GPE's focus would have been very much around supporting national governments to develop good quality education sector plans, and then providing additional grant funding to support implementation. And we still support the development of good quality sector plans, and significant progress has been made in that space. However, our current strategy, which runs from 2021 through 2025, evolved and was developed in the context of COVID and a challenging global economic environment. And it's focused on systems transformation. So basically working with governments and partners in each country for them to identify the key challenges that need to be addressed to make progress in their own education systems, to then focus on implementation of priority reforms that they have identified, and to try and align all stakeholders to achieve these results. And while GPE is the largest global fund in education, its strength is that it is a partnership and it responds to the needs of its partner countries. So in January of this year, ministers of education on GPE's board called for GPE and partners to catalyze more resources for education and to improve aid efficiency, harmonization, and alignment behind national systems and government priorities. That's why GPE is using its innovative finance mechanism, the multiplier, to crowd in new and additional co-financing that aligns behind national priorities for systems transformation. So since early 2021, we've allocated from the multiplier close to $500 million in grants, which in turn has mobilized approximately $2 billion in co-financing, either in the form of grants, in-kind contributions, concessional loans, or even through debt forgiveness operations. And this co-financing is coming from organizations like Education Above All, but also from multilateral development banks, multilateral and bilateral agencies, and also significantly from philanthropy and the private sector. So we're closing in on close to 150 million mobilized under our matching facility, where GPE will match dollar for dollar contributions from the private sector and philanthropy, which has allowed us to respond to the crisis in Ukraine, where, for example, digitalization, remote learning is so important given that context. So GPE is very much about adapting to each country's context and responding to their needs. Now, these efforts to engage actors, including a number of philanthropic organizations who may have very highly innovative programs, but are operating on a very small scale. Through the partnership with GPE, it's given them an opportunity to have a larger say in shaping national priorities, and also opportunities for their limited resources to scale up significantly. So in Kenya, for example, GPE, the World Bank, and the Lego Foundation are all collectively co-financing a program worth $700 million in education. While in Lesotho and Malawi, organizations like the Roger Federer Foundation are co-financing with us for the first time. And we have several more organizations from philanthropy actively developing co-financing proposals in a number of countries. So we very much looking forward to see more opportunities for growth and collaboration particularly in this region, both through philanthropy in the private sector, but also through a growing relationship in particular with the Asian Development Bank. I think overall, as you look at the enormous needs in education and the challenging economic picture, it's clear that we will have to expand our efforts to build and strengthen partnerships and look at innovative approaches, including private and public sector, and look for opportunities to create larger scale, more affordable and efficient financing packages that are focused on supporting national priorities for system transformation. Thank you.
Thank you. System transformation, partnerships, great mantras to work on. Let me turn to Tumo. Really, the story of Tumo. You had a very interesting model, Chris. How do you see, a very inclusive, sort of tech inclusive approach to young people, and also giving them the tangible skills and also making them responsible for their own learning journey? How do you see this model getting possible scale up? And also, how do you see possible, one is scaling up on your own, but also the other could be like partnerships or also sharing experiences and enabling more knowledge sharing so that other agencies can also look to replicating this. So how do you see scaling up and making this work for young people?
Perfect. Thanks, Shanti, and thank you for the opportunity to be back here. I can see a few familiar faces in the crowd, which is nice, and a really nice segue. Let me start a little bit by providing the context of TUMO, Center for Creative Technologies. So the why. Why did TUMO come about? Why did our founders feel the need? What was the trigger to create TUMO? And as you may or may not know, Armenia was part of the Soviet Union. It gained its independence in 1991, and the country inherited, and there was a remnant of the Soviet traditional education system, which in a lot of ways was very robust, but in a lot of ways was inefficient as well. That could probably be, said across multiple countries and geographies. Now, our founders very quickly uncovered these inefficiencies, and we say it laughingly, but we thought TUMO might be the antidote to that system. I like to say that it's complementary to that system, and we're taking a little bit of the burden off the Ministry of Education. So that's a little bit of the context. Very quickly around what TUMO is, it's free of charge, it's for teenagers, there's no certificates, there's no entrance requirements. Students or teenagers are open to come and go whenever they like. So I think it's important to set that context. And just on the equal access piece, Shanti, yes, we have a focus on disadvantaged children, but not only disadvantaged children. So equal access is, our core ethos. We have children in Armenia who can't pay 100 dram, which is the equivalent of 25 cents USD to catch a bus to the center, but then we have, teenagers that get dropped off by their private drivers and security guards. I think the beautiful thing is that both those students sit in the center together, and that inclusivity and that diversity helps them grow as individuals. So if we touch on scaling the model, this is the million-dollar question. We've had very generous benefactors. Most of them are American Armenians who have set the foundations. However, that is a daily challenge, and that's sort of what keeps us up at night. And when we think about Armenia, we've launched the Armenia campaign. So we're fundraising for 60 million USD. We've roughly raised about 42 million of that. And what does that essentially mean? That we're building a national network. So currently we have 4 centers and 20 TUMO boxes, which are repurposed shipping containers. They're cost effective. We deploy them in rural areas and villages. So we want to go from 4 centers to 16 centers and 20 boxes to 110 boxes. So we will reach that by 2029. But then the question, is how do we maintain that? And one of our strategies for that is sort of our international franchising model. We have 8 centers across 7 countries at the moment, and that supports with the Armenia model. But then the question then becomes, how do you maintain and sustain the international model? And these are all the discussions we're having today with the likes of ADB, obviously co-financing foundations like the Lego Foundation, like the, MasterCard Foundation, just to name a few. But once we finish the Armenia rollout, we'll be able to service 80,000 teenagers at any point in given time. Now, there's more than 80,000 teenagers, there's 250. But given they stay in the program on average for 2.5 years, it means they'll have access to the program at least once during their teenage lives. What's different very quickly about the program and what keeps teenagers coming back, which is astonishing for me, that level of engagement, is what we call in walkaway pedagogy. So, how would education need to change if students were okay or willing to walk away whenever they liked, right? So how do we continue getting, significant learning outcomes and keeping students engaged at the same time? And we have two core pillars at Tumo. One is choice and one is hyper-personalization. So we give them enough choice for them to be able to explore and find what they're passionate about and love. We have a saying, we say, teenagers hate to study, but they love to learn. And hyper-personalization. So the path personalizes their journey. So no student's journey is the same. They're essentially competing with themselves, not others. So that's just a little bit about our philosophy. And then there comes the quality versus scale equation. I know Stanley touched on this during our briefing, but it's sort of, we need to define what the outcomes are from a quality perspective. Technology is the issue, but it can also be the solution, but we need to do it correctly, right? We can use technology to touch the masses, but if the quality is not there, then it's counterproductive. So I think it's really all about defining the outcomes and making sure we know where we want to head.
Great, thanks, Chris. Access to technology and personalized learning and really future-facing, like helping teens to do that. It's a natural segue to quality. You mentioned quality versus scale. I mean, we look to Singapore as a very strong purveyor of quality in education across all levels, and we see the sort of system delivery being really conscious about quality. In Temasek Foundation, could you speak a little bit to how you've leveraged your work in the context of improving quality outcomes in education, and how does philanthropic capital come together with other kinds of capital to bring these outcomes for education? Well, I know that Temasek Foundation works across different areas, but speaking to education, how do you see your role and influence and the kind of impact you've seen thus far?
Thanks, Shanti, for the invitation. Let me first clarify, while the Singapore education works for Singapore, it doesn't necessarily work for the rest. Because we're a very small country, it's easy to pilot and to test some of these solutions. Perhaps I cover this broadly. For the last 2 days, we've heard statistics about poverty, accessibility to education, gender divides, etc. Allow me to maybe start by quoting former President Barack Obama. He says, "The best anti-poverty program is a world-class education." And I think that's perfectly right. And yet, poverty exists today. Now, if we want to change the game on education, we believe that we need to play the game differently. Differently among the different stakeholders. How so? First, 101, all of us need to stay invested. Second, we need to know who we are and what are we willing to risk, because different agencies have different risk appetite. So we've been always talking about PPP, but if you ask among the crowd who is going to raise the hand first to contribute and to start, that's a challenge. And partly that's because we have different risk appetite. If you look at the public sector funds are intended for the masses. They will be conservative, they'll be slow to respond, but they'll give you the ticket to move if you are able to de-risk the solutions you're bringing to the table. If you look at academics, bright ideas, bright solutions, very little capital to drive it forward. If you look at the private sector, they are looking for low risk, no risk, high returns. So how do you bridge the gap? There's a valley of death. Now, then we ask ourselves, as a philanthropic organization, Temasek Foundation, what can you do? As a role we played for the last 15 years, we would have given money out anyways to do capability building, to do conferences, and so on and so forth. So we ask ourselves, post-COVID, the role that we need to play is one, to put forward risk capital capital to de-risk so that you can build confidence in the markets among the stakeholders to say, this is proven, this is something that we're willing to work with, and then find somebody else to scale. Now, let me jump quickly and say that, therefore, we're working with stakeholders who would bring systems changes. And Temasek Foundation or any foundation cannot do this alone. We need to work together to run faster. And to do this, at least at the foundation, what we are looking at, when we have a high risk, it doesn't mean we do not ask questions. What we're looking for are measurable impact outcomes, and that has to be articulated well. Second, we need the solutions to be sustainable and that it can scale. For example, if somebody comes to us and say, hey, I have invented a car that can go backwards on your highway. Great idea. Not sustainable. Nobody is going to buy the good solution. So where is the sustainability once that we've proven the program? Second criteria, therefore, is our ability to make it sustainable. The solution must eventually benefit the community. Third, while traditional education has worked for many years, we're looking at alternative pathways, whether it's in the area of STEM, in the area of arts, in the area of sports. These are alternative pathways that allow people to learn with different abilities, different needs, and hence enhance the value of education beyond what mainstream governments would do. So I'll take a pause there and answer questions later. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandy. I think very interesting points about de-risking, but also being able to offer more contextual opportunities, which are targeted to different groups of people, and then possibly also looking at scale in that case. I mean, that I would like to use that as a way to go to the next round. I would like to touch on the point about climate. While I'm very tempted to pursue this topic of scale and the alternative pathways, maybe we can come to it in the third round. But if very quickly, if you could speak a little bit to the big topic of climate and how does your work. If I can go first to Mr. Fahad, if you could share a little bit about how you're embedding this whole notion of climate resilience, green schools, looking at curriculum and teacher training. So if you could share a little bit about what is on the cards and what you're thinking about for the future.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And since 2019, we start, addressing the climate change through providing the field green skills. So we want to make sure that the kids are really starting, through secondary education, on the field green skills, Secondly, just my colleague started to say, we tackle a lot on the personalized learning, customized education, to suit the community and the economy system that these, children live in. For example, children live in an agriculture community. In this case, their education must to be emphasized on the main element that can utilize for their community needs and to help achieve the sustainability that they have there. So through Education Above All Foundation, we prepare children, and youth for the involving in job marketing, bringing them on digitals and improving the innovation for enhancing first the climate change in their countries. So we work through for example, in India, we have a huge project. We work through 7 million kids, and we provided with the secondary education curriculums, where we go for green educations now. And this is for us is very, very important, and this is helping, for example, one of the programs that we are working on is first on the flooding, for India and Bangladesh. How we prepare the children, for this, how we prepare them for enhancing their agricultures, how we involve them, involving in the community base. Because one of the key things that what we want to prepare for these people is to prepare them for the skills that they can have job opportunities later, which is very, very important, And we know some of the rural area that because we are working on the most marginalized and hard to reach, and not all the children will have the most opportunity to go for higher educations. So that's why, you know, for us is involving, you know, climate change and addressing climate change in the early stage on primary and secondary is very important for us on enhancing this, you know, to provide them with the right skills, okay, through green skills. This is what we call it, you know, in our intervention, and involving on the secondary education, on the green education. And this is one of the main elements that we are working. We are addressing climate change on either on the infrastructures now, you know, so we have a very innovative ways, you know, of doing things for the refugees. For example, you know, we work with the most architects, you know, designing the needs for basic education learning, you know, for infrastructures where, you know, coming with the wind's coming to the lighting, you know, for this. So we created a very, very innovative tent, we call it the classrooms, you know, with addressing the climate change and addressing, you know, a very innovative way of how could we tackle all these things and making sure that it's aligned, you know, with the main objective that we are going for, green educations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's a lot of good work already underway, teacher training, curriculum. Let me turn to Mr. Hassan. You know, when it comes to older parts of the workforce, we are thinking, okay, how do we help people in fossil fuel industries to transition into you know, to green occupations through upskilling and reskilling. But when it comes to young people, you can already put them on a green track, not just to, you know, help them with skills for the current jobs, but also enable them to have entrepreneurship opportunities to actually, you know, instigate and to give rise to new industries that can be job creating. So could you share a little bit about your work in the space and what has struck you as having the most possible like opportunities that can be scaled up in the Asia region?
Well, no, this is a very important topic on one of the most pressing global challenges of our time. And, you know, the only way we can ensure a sustainable life for the generations to come is by incorporating climate action into our day-to-day life, including all jobs. And we shouldn't be focusing on how we can find green jobs, but in reality, we should focus on how to turn all jobs green. And when we say, you know, all jobs being green, there is always an opportunity to improve any existing job, even if there is emissions that would harm the environment. So there is all these initiatives and actions that are being taken to reduce emissions as well as improve the green actions that come from all jobs. Now, you mentioned earlier, young people can and should be the leaders actually in creating sustainable future. In fact, we believe that they are the solution in forging that objective. Now, with that said, we do acknowledge there are some challenges that restrain their ability to tap into their raw power effectively. And as such, our combined support as international development organizations is key. And this is why we do believe in the power of organizational collaboration, which has been mentioned multiple times by the speakers. And that is to effectively and efficiently, and I say amplify as scale up, a unified impact. However, we should always look at the quality. Now, young people can play a pivotal role in creating the pathways for new jobs and entrepreneurship that should be aligned with sustainability and environmental responsibility. And there are some key elements required to support this journey. The first and foremost, actually, is green education, which has been mentioned again multiple times. We do incorporate climate literacy into the education. We should actually include it into the education system, as well as the training that is incorporated forward if we want to achieve long-term sustainability. And this is why, you know, we try to collaborate as much as possible with organizations that are offering these type of, you know, as I had mentioned, green skills, to be able to incorporating them into existing jobs as well as new jobs, but also for entrepreneurship opportunities. And this comes to the second point, which is promoting green entrepreneurship, which includes also green agriculture, through providing the right tools, resources to embrace green practices that deliver innovation and sustainability, and can be in both businesses that are promoting green that are promoting green actions, but also those who are utilizing it. Like, for example, the utilization of green energy, including solar and wind, but also healthy practices and green practices that can be incorporated into any business that is being developed or expanded. Lastly, I go back to and I stress actually on global and collective collaboration, and that includes governments, international organizations, and the private sector, as you do need all the links to complete a change. Otherwise, without it, you will have scattered work that cannot be linked together, and you lose the effectiveness of any initiative that is focusing on improving the quality of jobs and making them green. By embracing these principles, we can equip young people with the right tools, skills, knowledge, and the support necessary to lead the way in building our future sustainably. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Want to come back on scale a little bit later if we have time, but turning to Chris, how do you see the intersection between digitalization and climate resilience? Of course, one is learning about climate, through the programs that you offer, but also there is also the intersection of technology and sustainability. Both in terms of how education can be offered, but also what young people can do by drawing on the power of technology to address climate resilience. What are your thoughts going forward?
Yeah, thanks, Shanti. Really great question. So a couple of things. So I agree. I think digitalization and climate resilience can intersect, but the question again is how, for me. So we know that there's going to be a whole heap of green jobs for the future generation, when we talk about sort of that green economy, but do we know exactly what those jobs are going to be? A lot of those jobs actually don't exist now. So again, it comes back to sort of both, you touched on education, but also that foresight and that thought leadership of what's to come and what I like to call the unknown frontier. So I think, things like when we talk about technology adoption of AI or data analytics to help optimize some of these industries are going to be key. But again, the question of how, it needs to be very focused. And then if I think about sort of certain areas, scientific skills as an example, people that are going to have to monitor and protect their environment. So, when we think about land and water, or when we think about sort of architectural or planning, the people that are going to build the smart cities or the environmentally friendly cities, how do we use technology to optimize those resources? Or lastly, when we think about green engineers and technology, the people that are going to build turbines, the people that are going to build solar panels, etc., right? So how do we again use technology to optimize some of these industries? But I'd like to go one layer deeper, and we know that there is going to be a green economy, there's going to be demand for these kinds of jobs, but are we going to have the skills to be able to meet that demand, I think is the big question. So coming back to education and our space as TUMO, when we think about 12 to 18-year-olds, it is early engagement and education for us. We've actually launched TUMO Climat or TUMO Climate, and that's through partnerships with the City of Paris. So we work with the City of Paris, climate experts to actually come up with a program for teenagers for that early engagement. So not only do they become more environmentally, conscious, but they also understand, what opportunities there will be for them in the future from a careers perspective and a development perspective. So that's super important. But if we think about sort of the 18+ population, we're already talking about reskilling, upskilling, which you touched on. So again, for us to be able to meet those needs, I think, we need to look, further downstream and start at a very young age to be able to meet those requirements for the next generation.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Great points. Let me turn to Poreg from GP. I know that GP recently launched the Climate Smart Education System. Could you speak a little bit about how you see it being played out at the country level, and what's been the uptake so far, and what are your expectations in 3 years and 5 years? Over to you, Parag.
Thanks very much, Shanti. I mean, I think looking at a big picture first, I mean, as the global community mobilizes to address climate change, I mean, education is increasingly recognized as an important vehicle to advance the climate change agenda. I think education is a key tool in building awareness, knowledge, and action to mitigate and adapt to climate change, while building the foundations for a fairer and more sustainable patterns of production and consumption. I think we know education can also build the resilience of societies, providing the knowledge and skills to protect people from the risks of climate-related disasters, dislocation, and structural unemployment. Yet the education sector itself is one of the most vulnerable sectors to climate impacts, and partner countries are particularly hard hit by both acute and slow onset climate-related disasters. The increasing frequency and intensity of extreme weather and environmental degradation have direct impacts on education infrastructure, destroying facilities and learning materials, as well as indirect impacts on children's access to learning as schools are closed, children's health, nutrition, and well-being are threatened, and families' livelihoods are devastated. So without concerted action to protect education from climate shocks and improve its relevance and quality to better prepare students for the realities of the 21st century, climate targets will remain out of reach. So from GPE's perspective, in response to the growing demand from our partners to take proactive measures to address climate impacts in and through education, we have developed a framework to define key entry points within education systems for climate action. So we have a climate smart education system framework. And these entry points offer powerful and effective opportunities to strengthen climate resilience and actions across 7 dimensions of the system. So data and evidence, policy and planning, coordination, finance, infrastructure, teaching and learning, and schools and communities. So building off an initial pilot in Zimbabwe and Malawi, we're now scaling up to provide small grants to a little over 20 countries, working through UNESCO and Save the Children to support countries' capacities to prioritize, select and implement context-appropriate strategies for climate-smart education system reforms, including disaster risk reduction and resilience planning and implementation, use of climate data, cross-sectoral coordination, and climate-relevant pedagogy and curricula. So while these smaller planning grants are underway now, we also see demand for much larger scale programs, which are innovative finance window, the multiplier, which I mentioned a little earlier. And here we see opportunities for education funding from organizations like GPE to be blended with climate financing from other actors to create these larger financing packages focused on climate smart education systems. So from GPE's perspective, we see a huge opportunity in this space to respond to the strong demand and needs from our partner countries. The challenge, of course, over the next few years will be for actors from different sectors to learn to know how to work with each other, to find the best evidence-based interventions, to find the win-wins for each sector, rather than being caught up in our respective silos. But definitely from where we sit, the opportunities over the coming years are enormous and the needs are ever growing. Thank you.
Thank you, Parag. Stanley, I wonder if you can speak to how you consider the potential for climate tech in the context of education, or like really making education systems more climate aware, and also teaching young people to address the issue of climate change in more action ways. I mean, we heard in the morning how important it is to help students to practice what they learn rather than just accumulate knowledge and keep it at a theoretical level. How do you see your work addressing this type of an objective?
I think when we looked at climate change, we are not saying this is lessons for students and these are lessons for community, lessons for governments. I think climate change affects all populations. So in this discourse, I will discuss climate change broadly. Before we deep dive into climate tech, I think we should not forget the traditional nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions themselves addresses key issues on deforestation, like how you limit deforestation, limit harm. You don't need tech to do that. And what are the things you can do about it is to begin to look at the various stakeholders, improve the life of farmers, improve the life and education of the younger folks. And with that, you would have limited the harm that is brought about by climate change. The second one is to really limit the loss of natural ecosystem through sustainable land management. And this is where the governments need to come in. The governments need to also educate people, communities, students. And thirdly, I think prevention is better than having to introduce climate tech if you can manage that. So let me not evade your question on climate tech, right? So now, if we have to still use climate technology, I think it's important to look at what is already existing and see how we can improve its processes. We don't have to start from ground zero. Look at farming methods. And if you look at farming versus CO2, methane emission is much warmer than that of CO2 emission. Could we apply science towards reducing emission through whether the new seed types, whether there are ways to do drip-based biosolutions to reduce methane, at the same time increase yields, improve life of farmers, improve life of education. It's a whole ecosystem change. So I wouldn't see climate tech as a one solution fits all. It needs to look at it at the systems level. So tech to improve existing processes. Second, we want to look at existing efficient systems in tech. It already exists. What are new ways of doing this better, faster, cheaper? How can we capture carbon to translate this into carbon utilization in other building materials or faster, better processes in equipment and better storage? And thirdly, I think we're looking at alternative models. So many people are saying deforestation with palm oil. I mean, that's a totally debatable topic on its own, but are there alternative crops that are available? So we are exploring jatropha. We feel that the emission is much less, the yield is higher, the income is higher. Again, going back to basics, so that we do not harm the environment as we approached it. So it's in short, we are looking at new tools, new models, new crops, new methods and research in our approach towards clean tech or climate tech. Thank you.
Thank you, Stanley. We are kind of approaching the end of the session, but there are some questions which, in the given time, I'd like to pose. The first one is around, can you give a specific example of an innovative government strategy that your organization supported or will and plans to scale up? I'm wondering whether, Mr. Fahad, would you like to kind of speak to that? If there's anything that you'd like to mention. I mean, we're talking about partnerships. You mentioned out of school strategies. Is that something that you'd like to speak to? An innovative strategy that you may have supported?
Yeah, as I stated, thank you very much. The very innovative ways that the strategy that we are adopting is the innovating for financing, and what we are doing is we're working now on very innovative way on social impacts and bonds, and this is something that we are currently adopting with the two biggest partners that we are working, and we are giving examples that where we adopting this in two countries, and we believe the social impact is something coming on the result base, and really we want to change a bit of ways of how this could be done on implementations. So my comments today, and my outcomes for this is really how could we scaling on the innovating for financing, and we believe innovating for financing is a key elements that we want to change the world. This is how we should be tackle and address. There are two elements, is financing and technical. And the technical, I think we talked today a lot of on the personalized learning, on the skills that we provide and the employment as stated, on and GBE, mentioning very clearly, on way of how more on the philanthropy side, and joining, the effort with other like World Bank and other, and the like Asian Development Bank and others. And this is very important and key elements that we want to address is the innovations, because the way that how the current system is working is not working very well, and how to tackle this we need really a very creative and innovative way. Thank you.
I might just touch on that question as well very quickly. So there was a lot of luck involved actually, but as part of an official government delegation, Angela Merkel visited our TUMO HQ center in Yerevan, and she was meant to stay for 15 minutes and she ended up staying for an hour and a half. And it's not about sort of dropping names, but that's the kind of champion we've required to make the required policy changes. And Angela Merkel actually spearheaded our Germany expansion. Now, how innovative is it? I'm not sure, but she got us in touch with the KfW Development Bank, and KfW is our main, I suppose, business development arm now, if you like, in Germany. So they funded the first project, TUMO Berlin, and now they are actively supporting us in finding foundations, primarily foundations in Germany, and co-financing the rest of them. So we're going to be launching another 6 centers in Germany and a box network, but you know, that's a really nice way where we've been able to work both at a national government level with the KfW Development Bank, which is linked to the government and takes on these kinds of non-profit projects, and working to find the right partners. So we've felt that's worked really well, and it's a really nice model that we're hoping to utilize in different countries and geographies.
Thank you so much. I think in the interest of time, maybe just one more question, which I'd like to pose to Poreg. There's this thing about, how do we, how do you think about governments harmonizing the use of technology, let's say harmonizing and address climate change, but more like, I guess, making technology more prevalent and to address climate change in education, Poreg? Since you work largely with government systems.
Yeah, thank you. It's a very, I mean, I think we've seen, especially through COVID, the step change in sort of use of education and digital technology and remote learning. And I think from that, we've learned a lot, the good and the bad. We've seen in some cases the challenge of access to internet has meant in many cases high-tech solutions have maybe created extra disparities and inequities, but also where education tech is used appropriately and through low-tech solution, it has provided access to children that have never had access before, even pre-COVID times, children that would have never had gone to school or opportunities to learn. Actually, because of COVID and because of the efforts to advance solutions and get access to children, even if it's very low-tech solutions as well, that has had a role to play. So I think the evidence base is still building. We are investing a lot into our knowledge and innovation exchange around technology. I think it's very much up to each government to decide what is appropriate for its own context, recognizing that those contexts differ greatly. From Somalia to Uzbekistan, it is a very different context. So our approach would say that there is no one size fits all, but it is important to pilot. It is important to be innovative. It is important to try new things and to learn from failure. That's the only way that we're going to grow. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we've kind of reached the end of the session. I just want to thank all of you for sparing the time and for sharing your insights. And I hope this will not be a conversation that ends here, but will continue in some way or another with each of you. And thank you so much to the online participants, speakers, and our audience here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.